There is a man in your life right now, or there has been, and he almost never appears on social media. No highlight reels, no gym selfies, no carefully worded captions about what he is grateful for this week. He exists almost entirely offline, and if you search for him, you find almost nothing. And here is what is interesting. Your instinct about that silence probably is not neutral. It is either suspicion, what is he hiding, or it is a quiet, unexplained pull toward him that you have not been able to fully explain to yourself. Most people never stop to examine that reaction. They file him under mysterious and move on. But that instinct you feel, that pull or that unease, is actually responding to something real, something specific, something that most people, even people who know him well, never fully translate. Because his silence online is not nothing. It is a language. And like any language you have not studied, you can hear it without understanding a single word. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly what he is saying, and it will change how you read every man you meet after this. Your first instinct when you notice a man has almost no posts is probably suspicion. He is hiding something, he does not want to be found. But that instinct, understandable as it is almost always wrong. There is a fundamental difference between withholding and filtering. Withholding is about concealment. Filtering is about selection. And the man who rarely or never posts is almost always doing the second thing, not the first. Think about what posting actually requires. It requires you to take a moment, a meal, a view, a thought, an achievement, and decide that it belongs on a screen in front of an audience, permanently attached to your name. That is not a neutral act. It is a performance decision. And some men, when they examine that decision honestly, simply do not want to make it. Not because they have something to hide, because they do not feel the need. Now, of course, context matters here. There are men who stay off social media because they are actively concealing a relationship, a life, a version of themselves that contradicts another version. That exists. But that behavior comes with other signals: inconsistency, unexplained unavailability, stories that do not quite align with each other. The digitally quiet man being described here does not carry those tells. His life, when you are in it, is consistent and present. What he has instead is a filter, a clear, if sometimes unconscious, sense of what deserves to be shared publicly and what simply does not. And his feed, or absence of one, reflects that filter perfectly. You might be thinking, couldn't this just be that he's not interested in technology? And sometimes, yes, that is part of it. But the men we are talking about are not confused by social media. They understand it. They have simply decided something about it. Most people post because an impulse arises and they follow it without much examination. He feels the same impulse. He just does not automatically obey it. That distinction looks small on the surface. Underneath it, it signals something significant about how he manages his own attention and his own behavior, which is, as it turns out, one of the rarest things you will encounter in a person. Once you understand what he is filtering toward, what he actually values, the picture becomes considerably more interesting. Here is something most people never stop to think about. Every time someone posts online and waits, even unconsciously, for a response, they are outsourcing a small piece of their self-worth to the crowd. Not dramatically, not in a way that looks like desperation. Just, they put something out, and the number of people who respond changes in a subtle but real way how they feel about themselves that day, about their humor, their attractiveness, their relevance. This is not a character flaw. It is a feature of how social media was deliberately designed. The feedback loop is intentional. Platforms are built to make external validation feel necessary, feel good, feel like something worth returning to. And for most people, it works exactly as designed. But some men never fully entered that loop. Or they entered it, felt what it was doing to them, and made a decision to step back out. What you find in those men, the ones who genuinely do not need the response, is something psychologists call an internal locus of control. It is a slightly clinical phrase for a very simple idea. His sense of who he is does not live in other people's opinions. It lives inside him. His assessment of his own life, his choices, his worth, those judgments originate from inside. not from whatever the crowd reflects back. You can observe this in small, specific ways. He does not fish for compliments, but he receives them gracefully and without deflecting. He does not announce his achievements to the room, but he is not falsely modest about them either. He forms opinions and holds them without needing agreement before he feels confident in them. When you push back on something he believes, he does not collapse and he does not become defensive. He actually engages with what you said. That stability is not something he performs for your benefit. It is something he actually has. And it is rare, genuinely rare. Most adults, not just men, carry a significant portion of their identity in how they are perceived by others. It takes a specific kind of self-awareness and, honestly, a specific kind of inner work to develop an identity that does not depend on that external mirror. The man who does not post has often, not always, but often, done some version of that work. He knows who he is with a degree of clarity that most people spend their whole lives searching for. He does not need a feed to remind him. He does not need your reaction to confirm him. That kind of groundedness is quiet. It does not announce itself at a dinner table or in the first 5 minutes of a conversation, but you feel it when you are around it. It feels like steadiness, like something that will still be there tomorrow and the day after. And the way that internal security shows up in how he actually lives, not online but in the room with you, is where the next truth waits. Think about the last time you were with someone who spent a significant portion of an evening getting the right shot. Adjusting the angle, checking the light, posting it, watching the early responses come in. Then returning, partially, to the meal that had been getting cold while all of that was happening. Now think about what it felt like to be with someone who simply stayed, who ate the food and talked to you and never once reached for their phone. Not because they were making a statement about phones, just because they were actually there. There is a meaningful psychological difference between those two experiences, and it runs deeper than simple politeness. Research on what is sometimes called the photo-taking impairment effect has found something counterintuitive, that documenting an experience can measurably reduce how fully you absorb it. When part of your mind is in production mode, capturing and framing and thinking about how something will be received, another part of your mind is unavailable for reception. You are, in a measurable sense, less present in the moment you are supposedly preserving. The man who does not post is, almost by definition, not in production mode. He is not thinking about how this looks from the outside. He is thinking about how this feels from the inside. He is inside the experience rather than standing slightly outside it with a frame around it. This shows up in ways you notice without necessarily naming. He remembers a specific detail from a conversation you had weeks ago, something you mentioned once, in passing, that you had already half forgotten. He caught the shift in your mood before you said a word about it. He watched the sunset instead of photographing it. He laughed at something and let it go, without needing to share it with anyone who was not in the room. That presence is not a discipline he is consciously practicing. It is simply where his attention lives by default. And attention is not a small thing. Where a person's attention actually lives, not where they say it lives, but where it goes when no one is asking, tells you almost everything about what they genuinely value. Not what they post about valuing, not what they caption, what they actually give their time and awareness to. He gives it to what is in front of him. That includes, when you are there, you. Before moving forward, there is one layer here that most conversations about this completely overlook. Presence is not the same as intensity. He is not staring at you. He is not performing attentiveness. It is quieter than that, and in some ways more significant because it is effortless. It is just where he is. And where a man is when he is with you reveals something about what he is protecting, which leads directly to the next truth. There is a specific kind of man who, when something genuinely good happens in his life, tells almost no one. Not because he is not proud, because he is. That might sound like a contradiction, but it is actually one of the most coherent patterns you will find in men who understand the relationship between what you expose and what you preserve. Privacy in this context is not the same as secrecy. Secrecy is about hiding things that cannot withstand scrutiny. Privacy is about protecting things that have value. Those are not the same impulse at all, and they do not look the same in practice. The man who does not post his relationship online, who does not share photos of a woman he is seeing, who does not announce a milestone, who keeps the texture of his private life genuinely private, is not doing that because he is ashamed of it. He is doing it because he has seen or felt what happens when private things are made public. They change. They become subject to outside opinion. They carry the weight of other people's projections and interpretations. And some things, the things that actually matter, do not survive that exposure intact. He has made a quiet decision to protect what he values from that process. Now, you might reasonably ask, does that mean you will never appear in his life publicly? And the answer is not quite that simple. When he introduces you to the people who matter to him, that introduction means something specific. It is not a social media post that 200 acquaintances scroll past without thinking. It is a deliberate act of inclusion into an inner circle that is not easily entered. That distinction matters more than it might initially seem. Being made public to an audience costs nothing. Being brought into someone's actual life costs something real. The man who protects his private world is often the same man who, when he does let someone in, lets them in fully, not partially, not performatively, fully. And understanding who he actually lets in, and how small that group tends to be, explains the next truth in a way that changes how you understand his behavior entirely. A man who does not perform for an audience of 500 usually has 3 people in his life he would do almost anything for. That ratio is not a coincidence. There is a psychological principle at work here that researchers who study social bonding have documented consistently. The principle that depth and breadth of social connection tend to trade off against each other. The more widely a person distributes their social energy, the thinner each individual connection tends to be. The more selectively they invest it, the more substantial each connection becomes. The man who is not managing a public persona, not maintaining a follower relationship with hundreds of loose acquaintances, not performing a version of himself for a broad audience, that man has social and emotional energy that goes somewhere. It goes into fewer relationships, and those relationships tend to be built with a depth that most people, if they are honest, have never actually experienced. You can observe this in specific ways. He remembers not just what his close friends told him, but the context around it, what was happening in their lives, why it mattered, what came before and after. He shows up without being asked. He does not have a large group of friends in the casual sense. He has a small group of people who would describe him as one of the most reliable, attentive presences in their lives. And when a man like this turns that same quality of attention toward a woman he is genuinely interested in, the experience is different from what most people are used to. It is not flashy. It does not come with grand declarations posted for an audience. It comes quietly, in specific acts of attention and reliability that accumulate over time into something that feels, without you entirely planning for it, like the most solid thing in your current life. Of course, this also means his circle is not easy to enter. He is not collecting people. He is not networking in the social sense. He is investing, and he is selective about where that investment goes. Being outside his circle means almost nothing to him. Being inside it means almost everything. Remember what was said at the very beginning of this video? That his silence online is a language, and that by the end you would understand every word of it? The next truth is where that translation starts to feel genuinely personal. At some point, you may have noticed that he remembered something small, something you said almost in passing, and it stopped you for a moment. Because most people do not catch those things. He did. That is not a coincidence. And it is not charm in the performance sense. It is a direct consequence of where his attention actually lives. The man who is not mentally occupied with content creation, not checking a feed between sentences, not half composing a caption while you are talking, that man is receiving you differently than most people do. His perceptual bandwidth is not divided. When you speak, he is actually listening, not waiting to respond, not forming his next point, listening. Behavioral researchers who study attention and interpersonal perception have found that people who spend less time in passive media consumption, scrolling, watching, reacting to content, tend to score significantly higher on measures of what is called social attunement. That is, the ability to accurately read the emotional and psychological states of the people around them, to notice what is not being said as clearly as what is. He notices the thing you almost said and then didn't. He catches the slight hesitation before you answered a question. He sees that you are tired before you mention it. He registers when your energy in a room is different from what it was an hour ago, not because he is analyzing you, but because he is actually paying attention. This can feel, at first, slightly disarming. You are not used to being seen that clearly without asking for it. Now, you might wonder, couldn't some men simply be naturally perceptive, regardless of their social media habits? Yes. Perceptiveness exists on a spectrum, and some people are more naturally attuned than others. But attention is also a skill shaped by habit. A man who has spent years not fragmenting his attention across a dozen digital surfaces has, whether deliberately or not, trained himself to be present in a way that most people have quietly untrained themselves out of. He notices more because he is actually looking. And what he is looking at, when he is genuinely interested in someone, is not just the surface, which is what makes the final truth, the one saved deliberately for this moment, the most significant of all. Confidence, real confidence, has a very specific quality that most people mistake for aloofness. It is quiet. It does not announce itself. It does not need the room to turn. This is the truth that almost no one reaches when they think about men who do not post on social media. Not because it is hidden, exactly, but because it requires letting go of the assumption that visibility equals value. And that is an assumption so deeply embedded in the current landscape that most people carry it without knowing it is there. The man who does not need to be seen publicly is not performing humility. He is not making a statement. He is not trying to seem mysterious. He simply does not experience the need for public validation as a significant force in his life. And that absence, that specific thing that is not driving his behavior, is one of the clearest indicators of psychological security that exists. Think about what it actually takes to not post. Not just once when you forget, but consistently, over years, in a world where the social pressure to perform your life online is genuinely intense, where the unspoken expectation is that good things should be shared, that relationships should be documented, that your existence should leave a regular digital trace. To move through that environment and simply not feel compelled by it, that is not passivity. It is a form of self-possession that is genuinely uncommon. Psychologists who study self-determination theory, the study of what actually motivates human behavior at a deep level, distinguish between people who are primarily driven by external rewards like approval, visibility, and social comparison, and people who are primarily driven by internal values like meaning, integrity, and personal standards. The externally driven person needs the audience. The internally driven person does not. The man who does not post is, in most cases, operating from the second place. And here is what that means in practice, in a relationship, in a conversation, in the small daily moments where character actually shows itself. He is not with you to be seen with you. He is not investing in you to have a story to tell. He is not attentive because attentiveness is the performance he has decided to give. He is those things because that is actually what he values. And he does not need anyone outside the two of you to confirm that it matters. That is a rare thing. It is the kind of steadiness that most people describe, when they have experienced it, as feeling like finally being on solid ground. His silence online was never absence. It was always selection. It was the quiet, consistent choice of a man who knows what he values and does not need a crowd to validate the choice. And now you know exactly what that silence means. Everything covered in this video points toward one unified truth. The man who does not post is not missing from the world. He is fully present in a much smaller, more deliberate version of it. His privacy is not a wall. his quiet is not emptiness. His absence from the feed is a direct reflection of where his attention, his energy, and his genuine investment actually live, which is in the real, physical, present moments of his life. That is not a personality type. It is a set of values made visible through behavior. And here is the broader principle underneath all of it. In a world built to reward performance, a man who consistently chooses presence over visibility is telling you something important about who he is when no one is watching, which is ultimately the only version of a person that actually matters. You now have something you did not have at the beginning of this video. You have a translation. The next time you encounter a man whose online presence is minimal, you will not default to suspicion or confusion. You will know how to read what his silence is actually saying. You do not need to overanalyze it. You do not need to test it or probe it. You just need to pay the same quality of attention to him that he is, almost certainly, already paying to you. I read every comment on this channel, and I want to ask you something specific. Tell me in the comments, do you know a man like this, or have you been misreading his silence? I want to hear what you have noticed. If this video changed something in how you see this, subscribe, because what we explore on this channel goes beyond surface signals into the actual psychology underneath behavior. The patterns that, once you understand them, you cannot unsee. And if this changed how you read silence, wait until you see what I am covering next, because the way a man texts you tells a completely different story, and almost no one knows how to read it.